This is Tony Ward at the University of the West of England, and today I'm talking to Dr Maureen McIntosh, who is currently Chair of the Division of Counselling Psychology of the British Psychological Society. And today we're talking about the issue of diversity and leadership within counselling psychology. I guess a good starting point would be to think we know that as counselling psychologists we're trying to champion diversity. Do you have any thoughts about what we as counselling psychologists can do to encourage diversity within our work settings?
Well, I think the difficulty sometimes is that counselling psychologists may not always be in positions of leadership roles within, say, for instance, the NHS. You know, a lot of the clinical leads are usually clinical psychologists. I know that isn't the same for all places, because I do know of consultant counselling psychologists. So, you know, as far as recruitment is concerned, usually that is done by very, very senior heads of services or leads. I think things are changing slightly, but I suppose it's different in different places. I worked in East London for a number of years, 13 years, and there were a variety of different ethnic minority groups, not as many black psychologists as I would have thought, given the demographic within East London. Mm-hmm. And I think that, I recently attended a General Assembly meeting of all the network chairs and sections, etc. And in that room, I think there were two black psychologists that were in leadership positions. And I think that the BPS do acknowledge that within training programs, there aren't as many coming through. And it's a question that the BPS, I think, are grappling with and trying to understand from a social justice, cultural diversity angle, so that they can begin to be more, they can find ways of being more inclusive. I think on an individual level, I think that, you know, I think we all have, I don't know, the potential to, point that out, because I think that often maybe within some circles, culture and diversity isn't talked about. You know, I've heard the term colorblind services, you know, where people, you know, want to treat everyone the same, but everyone isn't the same. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that the difference is something to be valued, but right through, not just appreciating that service users come from a different culture and seeing how best you can meet those needs, but being more inclusive within the profession and appreciating that everyone has something to bring. But I think that perhaps needs a real culture change on the part of those that are in positions of power that can make these decisions. I'm not sure if I answered that question. Have I answered it?
You've given lots of ideas there,
Yeah.
Maureen. If I could, I'll just pick up a couple of points. This notion of colourblind service is an interesting one. I remember years ago when I was working in Jamaica, I had some very interesting discussions with a Professor Fred Hickling out there. And I remember saying something like that to him one day, and he caught me up quite sharp about that and said, "You can't be colourblind. You know, let's just not even go there." So it's interesting that services might think, you know, this notion of being colourblind. You know, I think his answer to that is you cannot not see colour.
Yeah.
And we have our implicit biases that might be there, which can be very difficult for people to overcome. So he thought that was quite a difficult notion, I think. And the other point I thought that was interesting is this observation that actually as a profession in counselling psychology, we may not be that diverse, and we may not be training a very diverse workforce. So that's kind of pushing it back to the courses and the universities again, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And
I think the well, see, I think we did actually try to collect some data on our on diversity and to the training programs. I think that some of the feedback that we've got from different surveys, like, for instance, the Black and Asian Counselling Psychology Group sort of did a survey and within the courses and just to try and get the views of ethnic minorities and how they experience the training. And, you know, some of them experienced not feeling, you know, we talk about colourblind, but not really feeling as though their voices get heard, you know. And so there's a sense that this sense of feeling, I suppose, a bit marginalised even within the courses. And I'm not saying it's intentional, but just having topics such as, you know, modules on diversity seems to not quite go far enough, because then when that person is trained and then goes into services, they can often still experience that sense of not really feeling as though they belong. Do you see what I mean? Because they're always in the minority. And I was just actually, I don't know if you've seen The Psychologist today, but I was just kind of, when I was waiting for this interview to begin, came across an article, just a small piece on boardroom imbalance and about the government backing a review where it's found that more than half of companies in the FTSE 100 do not have an ethnic minority member on their board. Mm-hmm. And one of the chartered psychologists here writing about it was sort of saying that we kind of really need to be minimum having at least one non-white member on board. So I think that it's not something that's just happening within training courses and within maybe within the BPS that there are many people of colour, but I think it's right the way through. And I think what you said about the implicit biases, that I wonder if those that are in power that are making those choices are often choosing people like them, because it can feel comfortable if you think you know they're from the majority group, and people feel safer, don't they, when they're with groups of people that but I just don't think that you know, I think that that's hard to challenge, you know, because often people think that they're doing enough if there's one person there that's from a different culture, you know. And I can't believe, you know, that there, as far as I know, there's only myself and another black psychologist that's the chair of a division. So there's me for the counselling psychology division, and another person, Roxane, for the division of occupational psychology. And I know that psychology is really popular at bachelor level, but it doesn't seem to transcend into courses, you know, clinical courses, and what's going on at the higher level. What is the, you know, I'm just not sure. And I think it's hard to challenge people because, and people's assumptions or people's prejudices, you know, because sometimes you might get labelled as someone that's got a chip on your shoulder or something. So I think until we can shift the discourse so that it's a bit more helpful and people are willing to make different choices about who they bring in and who they include into leadership roles, I think we're just going to be saying the same thing in 10, 20 years' time.
Absolutely. I hope not, but It's a thorny issue to think, well, how do we change that? What can we do? I guess we as psychologists ought to be a good profession to take a lead on that.
Yeah.
Perhaps if we could move on to another issue I know our students will be interested in. We have a diverse groups of students at UWE, not as diverse as we might like them to be in terms of, as you say, the kind of makeup of society as it is and how that gets reflected. But I hope some of our students will aspire to leadership positions in the future, and I hope some of them will take this kind of agenda forward. Do you have any thoughts about those students that might aspire towards leadership? And it probably ought to be all of them, given the band structures in the NHS these days. Leadership comes in quite quickly. What can individuals do you think, to prepare themselves, push themselves, if they're interested in moving in that direction?
I think it's about taking up opportunities that challenge you to grow. I don't know if you saw my one-to-one interview in the Psychologist. It was featured last month, and I talk about some of the people that have influenced me, some of the situations that have influenced me. And one of the things that I mentioned was that when I was doing psychology, just at a GCSE level, actually, and my tutor was a black psychologist, but her style and way of teaching was really made psychology really accessible, made it feel a very exciting subject to get into. And then I remember her saying that she was planning on doing her PhD, and she, like I said in the article, that the way she talked about it, her sense of determination about, what she wanted for herself, even though she actually was very open about talking about the barriers and actually the politics and the prejudices that might prevent her from achieving her goal. But despite all of that, she was still determined to try. And I think for the ones that do manage to get into people of color or people from any other cultural background that manage to get into leadership positions, is that they don't actually let their sort of determination be swayed by those barriers, whether they're visible or invisible. But sometimes you can feel it's a real deep felt sense of not people, certain systems or individuals or groups of people in positions of power literally just closing the door and preventing one from moving up. And I often describe that. I've had conversations with people about that and feel that there's something about them feeling quite threatened by difference. I feel that sometimes for some people, having maybe a black person around that table offering opinions, really kind of being in that kind of leadership position can feel very challenging, especially if there is a mindset there that says you're not meant to be here, that black people or others from different cultural backgrounds aren't meant to aspire beyond a certain level. And then you're there, and then people kind of question that. Because I often feel from personal experience that I have to prove myself much more because of the feeling that people don't quite trust what they're seeing. They're surprised, I remember I attended a culture and diversity conference, actually a 2-day conference in April, run by who was it by? The cognitive psychology? Was it the BABCP? I think it was. And they did a whole 2 days on culture and diversity. And they talked about why is it that there is such an imbalance? Why is it that there are so many ethnic minorities in psychiatric wards, sometimes even being given higher amounts of medication than their white counterpart, for instance? Why aren't there as many black psychologists or people from indigenous groups coming through the ranks, and why aren't we supporting it? And one of the presenters was a well-known professor who said that he's been doing research into this field for a very long time, and some of the things that he spoke about 20 years ago, they're still grappling with now, and he can't understand it. I mean, I talked very openly in one of the workshops that I was in about the expectations of others. So when I'm talking on the phone, or when I write a letter, maybe even to a client, my name is Maureen McIntosh, and people make assumptions that I'm from Scotland, or that I'm not who they see at their front door, and then I turn up and they're sometimes pleasantly surprised, but sometimes very suspicious of that difference. They don't know how to relate to that difference. And I kind of think that if it's perhaps like that for some clients who perhaps may only think that the doctor is from a particular cultural group, I wonder what it's like within organizations.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So you might have a lot of black people that are that are nurses, that are porters, that are in other types of roles, still valuable, but at a certain level. But people seem to not have the expectation for them to rise above a particular level. And I wonder about black people themselves, about historically that kind of, coming from a slavery background. And even though that was many, many, many generations ago, then how that then gets passed down, that kind of sense of not being good enough. And how that gets perpetuated within organisations.
So there's that kind of organisational culture and history that people can feel up against. Very interesting what you were saying there. A number of the points you made actually chime with some of the conversations I had with Professor Hickling when I was in Jamaica, who very much would have had a lot to say on a lot of those issues about the culture and moving on and so on. Perhaps, Maureen, we could finish off. I wonder if you have any personal hints or tips you would pass on to our students.
Yeah, I mean, I think that within the division of counselling psychology, I think that we have a lot of leadership qualities that we can offer within the services that we are, have clinical placements in. And I think it is about putting yourself forward for things, because in putting yourself forward for things, one, you learn. Two, you get more confident at doing whatever it is that you're doing. And all of these things can be transferable skills that you can build on in building up your leadership qualities. So I think that if I had any advice, which is what I've done, I'm not a hugely, I might sound confident, but I don't feel confident in all situations. And what I've been trying to do in order to manage whatever fears I might have of doing presentations or even taking part in this interview is to say to myself, when I'm invited to do things or when I see opportunities, acknowledge the feeling. I'm a bit nervous about this, but it's an opportunity to learn, and it's an opportunity to grow. And as psychologists, this is what we're about, trying to empower that within our clients. But we should want that for ourselves, and I suppose if we hold back, then we never get to see that we actually are rather good at particular things. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
absolutely. I
don't know.
think our students will find that very helpful set of suggestions there, Maureen. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
No, thank you, Tony, for inviting me. Thank you.
You're welcome.